Hello, everybody. Once again, I'm more than pleased to have Andrij Dobrijanski in the interview, in the channel. Andrij is based in New York City. He's a Ukrainian American. He's the spokesperson of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of Amerika, UCCA. By the way, let me introduce myself. Also, my name is Christoph Müller. I make videos for supporting democracy in Ukraine here on YouTube. I am in Germany. And if you find this program informative and interesting, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Hello, Andrij.
Hi, and thanks for having me on. It's been a while, but there's always more stuff to talk about.
Absolutely. In one of our last interviews, Andrij, right before his inauguration just a year ago, I saw a tiny chance that Donald Trump could change things now for the better. But you had already some mixed feelings and said he could completely ruin it. And I think it turned out to be even worse, beyond all imagination. The threat for us here in Europe feels really real, very real now. And we are squeezed now between two evil forces. On the right side, it's Russia. And on the left side, in the West, it's the USA, who have turned to be a hostile force towards Europe and democracy. And so I guess what shall we do now here in Europe? Can you give me some advice? Can you give us Europeans some advice? What would you think? What should we do
Well,
here?
I would say we missed one more potential issue. If we're saying that Russia, rightly so, is not in favor of a united and strong democratic Europe. They would like their neighbors to fall as low as they have, so that their citizens aren't jealous of what the prosperity in life can actually be. On the other side of the Atlantic, we have the United States and this administration that is also working to disunite Europe, is not in favor of having multilateral deals with them. So they're also interested in Europe breaking up from its solidarity. And I would say the third aspect is domestic issues as well within each individual European country, whether you're talking about reform in the UK, the Le Pen's in France. You have better expertise about Germany, but we know that one of the reasons that Chancellor Merz is so careful about how he phrases things is because he's thinking about the next elections, and the local elections in Germany definitely showed a change in the polls. But let's look at a country like Hungary, where we see very clearly what a potential future could be for European countries that do not care about working together with others, that flaunt their responsibilities under the EU Charter, and frankly aren't a net gain for European solidarity, but actually work towards disuniting Europe going forward. And that is something that, again, I think that Russia would like to see. I think the current U.S. administration would like to see. And there are plenty of political actors within Europe itself that would like to see Europe disunited. And I think this should buoy up the spirits of Europe, understanding that what you are doing already is something that is organizing and uniting people against you, because Europe United stands at one of the largest GDPs around the entire world,
Mhm.
rivaling that of the output of the United States. Europe United is a much more powerful force than anything else. So I think it's a good sign to see that so many of enemies are aligned against it, because it demonstrates that you're doing something right.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. The United States. I also haven't lost hope that the United States, they are also a force still. There are many people who have still those democratic genes in themselves, like you or many of them. I cannot imagine how it feels being an American and being under a president like that, who is doing things that sound so insane in our ears.
Right, but at the same time, we live a very comfortable life here. We will never have to worry about being invaded. We are the richest country in the world with the most powerful army in the world.
Yeah.
It really removes us from the responsibilities of the world, which is why having a United States Department that actually went out and visited parts of the world, went out to visit small island nation states and parts of the world that are endangered, understood what is happening in different war zones, and understanding then, after doing those visits, understanding how lucky we are here in the United States. Unfortunately for the United States, we have crossed a line that we can never come back from. We have, through our actions, shutting down the grants from the U.S. Agency for International Aid, USAID, from our pulling out of the WHO and other international bodies, we've probably condemned over 1 million people to death that would not have had to die without our actions. That's not something that can easily be forgotten. In fact,
Yeah.
when I'm talking to American audiences, I try to liken diplomacy to a marriage with a partner that has a very long memory and will always bring up things. And this is the case in diplomacy. You might not feel that your actions are something that are to be remembered at the next meeting or the one after that, but diplomats have a very long memory. Diplomats will tell you what happened centuries ago between your two countries, because that's what they are instructed on, to understand the totality of a nation's relationship with another nation.
But
And
how
therefore, yeah, and therefore, the moves that are being done today, they will be remembered for many years after Trump leaves office.
Yeah, but how can it be that the leader of a country has absolutely no knowledge of those things and no interest in alliance, and he's leading the thing. I have this image of a 3-year-old boy who has got a loaded gun into his hand. He's can cause a lot of problems. He can kill his mother, can kill everybody. So this is really dangerous. How can it be that your president is there? Is there any chance that he's impeached?
Not this year, obviously, with the fact that he has total control over the Congress and Senate. Uh, Next year, there's a potential that there's a change of leadership in both the House of Representatives and the Senate after an election this November. We know that there are other members of administration that are being proposed to be impeached, no less the Secretary of Homeland Security for all of the repressions being done by ICE agents around the country. So Secretary Kristi Noem already has an impeachment process started against her of ever 70 supporters. However, that will not get a majority in the House dominated by Republicans. So we will see what happens to President Trump. I think less so than being impeached. It's about understanding what can actually be done. This is 2025 was a historic year because of the lack of legislation. There's been not such a year of less legislation within the United States Congress or being signed by President Trump. And that's because President Trump has realized he does not want to deal with Congress. He does not want to have laws that or change the United States or the world through laws that will have perpetuity. He wants to have individual deals with his administration and a university, his administration and a private business, his administration and the leadership of another country. Not multilateral like the European Union, not what the European Union did with South America inside a free trade agreement between many nations to many nations. President Trump deals in absolutes and one nation to one nation, and that is his methodology. He will do that through executive order. He will not wait for Congress. And therefore, if you're talking about what Congress can do in the future, say if there's a change of opposition leadership in our Congress, there's not much to be done through law because not a lot of law has been changed. It's all been done by fiat from the executive office. And unless Congress acts to actually vote to restrain the presidency, then we would still have judicial challenges to the Supreme Court as well.
It's all about violence. You know, we heard about these horrible incidents with the ICE agent. Dictatorship is coming up, and I'm really afraid that the United States will turn into a civil war situation, sort of. What is your assessment on that?
Yeah, very much so. Given what happened in the first administration, the crackdowns, President Trump was disappointed that his administration did not listen to him in the first administration, did not shoot protesters when he wanted them to be shot. However, now we are in a different epoch where we have a military leadership that is inclined to listen to him. Many people have resigned. I think the biggest thing that people need to understand is how much of the government is gone. So
Yeah.
I mentioned international aid earlier, but many thousands of people have left our Justice Department. Many thousands of people have left. There's only half of the National Security Council exists anymore. An operation that used to have intelligence on a lot of the world and the United States. Everything has been pared back to a smaller and smaller amount of people, and in that respect, the smaller amount of people you have, the less dissent you have within those organizations. They are able to dominate by ideology, dominate from the top down. It's very much a power vertical, similar to what strongmen have in other
Hmm.
countries. We are not at the point of Putin or Orban in terms of total control, but we are getting closer and closer to that as we close down more and more departments. Just today, President Trump had a press conference where he hailed that this government has let go of so many government workers. This is lower level workers, but also, as I mentioned, we have gotten rid of a lot of the policing in this country from federal investigators, as well as any and all of our resources to fight cybercrime and cyber intrusions against this country. We've all but defunded the police, to use a term from the left. We've defunded the police that would protect us from cyber attacks and prosecute and investigate those who commit cyber attacks against us. So we are in a very delicate state because of that. And whoever comes after President Trump, were there to be an election, and that's still a question. The question is, how radical does that person need to be? Would there be a commission on truth and reconciliation to find out exactly how many laws were violated during this presidency? Something needs to be done to assure the American people that we are going back on the right track, if that's possible. And I think it would be a step towards demonstrating to the world that the United States could still be a world leader. But as I said earlier, I think we have already gone past any potential return to the status quo, how they were before the second Trump administration. Once this convicted felon, was elected president, I believe that the rest of the world started to understand that perhaps the generosity and the nature of Americans that has always been a shining example to the world in terms of democracy, free speech, etc. Perhaps they are turning more imperialistic in a way that America has never been before. And therefore, those opinions by our European friends, our African friends, the South Asian areas where many countries are now turning towards China because they think they can actually work with China as a more reliable partner than the United States. All of these things you could try to get in the good graces of other countries by trying to do a commission to figure out exactly how many crimes were committed under President Trump. But nevertheless, we've already crossed a certain threshold. We've crossed the Rubicon as far as international support for the United States going forward.
Yeah, my fear is that the administration of Trump will also perpetuate and continue after he's gone. I mean, he is 80 years old. Probably he will not be a second get a third term. we even talk about third term, but I guess he will not. But there is also J.D. Vance. Now he's vice president, and he also doesn't make a very good impression on me. And his utterings are even worse than those of Trump. I'm not sure about that, but. So
there's definitely a split of opinion within the administration and about the political future of the party. There also exists still a fair amount of people that remember the Republican Party prior to President Trump. But in the end, I think that history teaches us that there might be a resetting and a return to another kind of leadership from one presidency to the next. Somebody as radical as Trump usually is followed by somebody more middle of the road like Joe Biden, as we saw last time. But I don't know if that works out for America and the world after the fact. Maybe we do need somebody more from a younger generation who's willing to throw away a lot of the things that allowed President Trump to become president. And then the final question is, in terms of this discussion, is whether Trump will allow an election to happen. It's less whether he wants to run for a third term. It's more so whether he will find a legal means through an insurrection or other extra legal means to cancel the election. And we've seen him declare emergencies for numerous things that are outside the constitutional barriers of the White House. It is Congress that sets tariffs, and he is saying because of a law granting him emergency power to grant tariffs, he can do that as far as what he did in terms of causing a trade war all around the world. That is expressly against the Constitution. And just in the last couple of days, we have seen his conversation publicly with other countries saying that he's imposing tariffs because of Greenland because he did not receive the Nobel Prize or because they're not letting him do things. Now, these stand in direct dissonance with what he's done in declaring these as emergency powers. So are they emergency powers or not is a key ruling of the United States Supreme Court that we are waiting on. But if he's so willing to use emergency declarations for a whole host of things, then it might be possible that he might seek some kind of emergency to prevent an election going forward in 3 years' time.
For a democratic country, you have to follow the democratic rules, and they don't interest Donald Trump. He wants to get rid of all rules so he can reign like a king or like a dictator, like Vladimir Putin, whom he admires, and all those things, human rights and dignity, everything that doesn't count anymore. Only to be strong, that counts. This reminds me of this very wise and incredible fairy tale of Hans Christian Andersen, which is called "The Emperor's New Clothes." I guess you know it. The Emperor's New Clothes.
Yeah, I think did you do a cartoon about that at some point? But I think we've talked about the Emperor's New Clothes several times, even during the first Trump administration. Yes.
It's interesting, yeah. We talk all the time about that. I made not a cartoon, but I made a broadcast on myself on this because this is our politicians here in Europe always think they have to bow in front of Donald Trump and say he's the nicest, he's the most beautiful, the most wise guy. What would you suggest to our European leaders, to Friedrich Merz? What should they do? How should they behave towards Donald Trump?
Well, when you mention things are sort of backwards the way they should be, I keep thinking about how Marco Rubio had a summit in Saudi Arabia earlier in 2025 with the Ukrainian delegation speaking, and there was a letter issued by the Ukrainian president after that meeting with Marco Rubio, and in that letter, President Zelensky, on behalf of the Ukrainian people, first he thanked President Trump, then he thanked the United States Congress, and only later did he thank the American people. And it should be the reverse. It should be you thank the American people for their tax payments that allow for this generosity to happen. Then you thank their representatives who are Congress. That's the people's house. And only at the end would you thank the president because he's frankly the least important person within this complex. And so when we're talking about people should be trained, it's really the United States that is training the world to act like this. They are training people that the best way to do this is just make sure you flatter President Trump, make sure you give him gifts, and possibly good things will happen to you. This happens on the international level. This also happens as far as pardons. We're having scandals come out every day about people who are pardoned by President Trump only after political donations are made to him, including this woman who was sentenced for fraud in California, received a pardon by President Trump, and then committed fraud again. Multi-million-dollar fraud, and then received a further commutation after another political donation was made to President Trump. This is happening on the level of the Grand Ballroom that he's building. He's having private entities donate money, quote unquote, to some kind of account that is not controlled by Congress. And being able to use that as a slush fund. This is also ripe for corruption. And the political influence of money is clearly what President Trump is trying to train the world, or his administration trying to train the world, whether that's helping him build his ballroom or join his Council of Peace, for which he's asking $1 billion for any individual or nation who seeks to join this council.
And this is so insane that people like Putin or somebody like that could be on a Council of Peace, and if you just pay enough money to him. So this, I mean, when we mention Putin, for Putin, Trump is, I guess, the jackpot. He is the biggest benefit. It's about NATO, the NATO alliance, which has been so strong. is completely eroding now so quickly, and it's NATO has always been a big threat for Putin. Felt it was not a threat, but Putin felt being threatened by NATO, and so he wanted to get rid of it. And I thought in 2014 already that Putin would attack a NATO country, and so like Lithuania or East Estonia, and then the NATO perhaps would dissolve because nobody would react. Really, that was my thought. But I never could have imagined that now from within, from the inside, the American president would start doing things to erode, to destroy NATO, the NATO alliance. I'm talking of Greenland now, that he is really insisting on getting Greenland like a boy who wants to have a candy in the candy store. It's like, and so Putin, they must jump around and say, we couldn't get it, we couldn't have get it better. So
Exactly.
this is not a question. Yeah. Okay. Continue.
Because Putin, since he began his leadership, has never been about raising the quality of life within Russia and his people, be they subjected to, involuntarily or willing Russians. He only seeks to lower the quality of life around the rest of the world, so that everybody is down on their level of dysfunction, of corruption, of inability to really attain any goals. So we mentioned at the beginning, Europe has an entity to its east that seeks to see Europe disunited. The United States would also like to see Europe disunited, and frankly, President Trump really doesn't differentiate between NATO and the Council of Europe. For him, it's all one entity, and he does not like it standing united. Primarily because of trade deals, less so militarily, but now he's kind of uniting that with his threat of tariffs against nations who will stand against his annexation of Greenland.
But you say the United States want to see Europe being disunited.
Yes.
But I cannot believe this. It's just that the current leadership of the United States wants to see Europe to be disunited. Or is it all the 77 million people who voted for Trump? They also want to see Europe disunited. Pardon me?
Yeah, definitely not the 77 million, because this is an issue that comes up again whenever President Trump does something, such as the ICE crackdown of immigrants in this country or other issues. Everybody who supports this say that, well, the people voted for this 77 million. Well, that's not what they all voted for. They voted for one person to be president. What he does after the fact can be one of many things. Maybe they didn't vote for him to attack Iran, but he still attacked Iran. Maybe they didn't vote for him to attack Venezuela. He still attacked Venezuela. In the end, we know that through public polling, it is Republican voters more than anybody who still support him at over 80%, possibly close to 90% of support within the Republican Party. But that is not who elected him. If it was just Republican voters, he would have lost. He won the majority of independent voters in this country, so voters who aren't registered either Democrat or Republican. Wow. And those are the people that more than any demographic has demonstrated that they do not trust this president. They have fallen away. If the election were today, they would not vote for him like they voted last time. So when we ask about who exactly is supporting this, it is definitely not the majority of the country. It is overwhelmingly not the Democratic voters in this country. It is clear it's not the independent voters anymore. So it's a smaller and smaller group of people, a sub-majority of the Republican Party that seems to be in support of this. And beyond that, we, through the public polling, seeing that he is a remarkably unpopular president, of under 40% of people thinking that this country is on the right direction, that they're doing the right thing. This is a remarkably unpopular president and an unpopular administration. However, that's just the system that we have now. There will be no snap elections. We can vote this year in November to change the makeup of Congress. But beyond that, there's just waiting this person out.
When I was talking to Ben Hodges, he said a very interesting phrase. He said, "Europe save us from ourselves." That was he just mentioned this during our conversation, and I had that feeling that we in Europe, we are really good democratic pupils. We have learned this democracy from the United States, and maybe also many other countries around the world, like Australia, New Zealand, and Japan and South Korea, the very good democratic countries. So my question to you would be, shouldn't we somehow very quickly get an alliance of democratic countries around the world, and not just a democratic political alliance, also a military alliance to be strong, like a NATO-like alliance, but without the United States and without Hungary and all those guys of kind of people who are not on our side.
Well, I would say first of all that President
I,
Biden, yeah,
let me just
yeah.
add, under the leadership of Ukraine, I would say. I would
Well,
suggest.
President Biden did inaugurate an alliance of democracies. It was one of his big initiatives. He saw the future of the world as being divided between those who still try to defend democracy and individual rights and sovereignty, and those autocratic forces that are at play in the world. So I would say somebody thought of this, somebody tried this. It is very clear that to motivate people in acting quickly takes a crisis more than anything else. People are not reacting to President Trump as a crisis per se at the moment, unless something were to happen with Greenland, more so than just the rhetoric. Ukraine had a very slow time in reforming itself up until a crisis moment hit, whether that was a revolution, whether that's the first invasion, the second invasion. Following all of those events, Ukraine reformed itself internally, changes to its constitution, changes to its laws, changes to its leadership. I don't believe that the crisis point has been recognized by the world. They will not be acting unless some major catastrophe befalls us. We should look back to the first Trump administration, which was already on pace to be pretty bad economically, as his trade war with China was losing. Different economic paths that he decided to take were not turning out as well as he thought. And then we were thrown into the worldwide pandemic, a crisis that united many people in the world until it didn't. But it was an incredible amount of participation with doctors and health agencies around the world trying to save people in a historic way. I don't think that going forward it's going to be as easy next time there's a pandemic, given the fact of how much disinformation about it exists online. And secondly, I don't feel that many people in the world think that this is as serious a crisis as many people believe it is, this meaning Trump's actions to disunite the world. I think, frankly, the deals announced by the Council of Europe and South America and the free trade agreement there definitely show to people still working towards freer trade, raising up individual stakeholders instead of disuniting us. The deal that Canada made with China, a historic deal that will now see Chinese electric vehicles throughout North America for the first time in a way that President Trump and every administration sought to block this from happening. We can see that the rest of the world is moving ahead without the United States, and that's going to be to the detriment of the United States. We will never be number one. We've been very lucky. You could show an American passport anywhere, and people would treat you very kindly because they knew you were from a better place, a place that was seeking to expand justice and lift up people from poverty around the world. No, that's no longer the case, and many doors will be shut to Americans going forward.
Yeah, do we always have to have a crisis, a real crisis to start acting? This is the main question. Can't we just get the wisdom and say we have to act before the crisis?
If you talk to some diplomats today, and I've had some conversations, they will say that we are already on the war to some international conflict, and it's just a matter of what countries prepare themselves quickly enough. I'm not saying World War III, but something on a worldwide scale that would, because of the actions of various different strong entities like the United
Mm.
States, like Russia, like China, things are moving ahead to some kind of confrontation, and frankly, it's only after that fact that we will be able to put the pieces together or not. But many diplomats believe that we are on the road to crisis already, given the fact that we have these kind of people in leadership around the world, especially leading the most powerful countries in the world.
So hopefully everything will come out very well
We
So
hope so too. We
we
hope
have to
so
get
too.
over
Yeah.
this. We never may lose optimism because you are a Ukrainian. You cannot lose optimism because, and I'm a German, and I also will never get back to a dictatorship.
Hmm.
And but Germany is divided somehow in the opinions. There's so many different opinions floating around. I guess also in the United States.
Hmm.
It's also due to the Russian disinformation, which is spreading around the world everywhere. And well, we haven't talked about China yet, no. So I also don't want to do that in this interview, but because
A lot of work.
China still keeps quiet, I guess. But they are the big enigma also.
They are an
Um,
enigma, but they are presenting themselves as a more reliable alternative. I'm not saying that they are, but especially in Southeast Asia, in countries in Micronesia, there are small island nation states that used to get subsidies and grants from the United States that no longer get them. That was a shock. And China can swoop in and say, we will give you some kind of subsidies or grants to help your infrastructure, and you'll become our partner. You'll open your sea lanes to us.
yeah,
Uh,
China's
yeah,
going to buy everything instead of conquering it. Well, how?
yeah,
By
yeah.
the way, well, okay, let's talk about China still briefly. What what do you think? Um, Everybody is afraid that China will invade Taiwan, but I heard some thoughts that China will just get into Russia, which was being the Manchuria, which used to be China those days,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the Russians they are weakened so much because of the war in Ukraine, they cannot get against Ukraine, and they have no chance militarily. So that what do you think? Will the Chinese go into?
This has been discussed in Washington for a while. It is very much something that uh, another administration would probably try to do, which is set up China and Russia to a conflict, entertain that, plant the seeds for that, have our enemies fight each other instead of us fighting our enemies. And Manchuria is a very easily conquered area. As you mentioned, Russia has lost so much material, so many mechanized vehicles, so many soldiers.
So it
And
would,
it
yeah.
would be pretty easy, especially since it's flat land to go right across. This is not a large piece of water like they would have to do for Taiwan.
Yeah, they would just get in and put some Chinese flag. Not even not that. So, okay, let's see what happens there.
I
Um,
mean, right now Russia is so indebted to China. What could they do? They owe Russia, so Russia owes China so much money.
Chinese have also a very long memory. I'm not
Yeah.
so completely in the Chinese history, but the way how Russia got this part of land from
Yeah.
China those days, that was also not so nice, wasn't it?
Very much so. And China would like to, correct history in the way Russia is doing in Ukraine, with territory in Russia, territory in Japan. There are many areas that China would like to claim as broader China, and that includes Taiwan. But we shall see when China feels it's comfortable enough with its military, which really hasn't had an international conflict as of yet. Um, that's not to say that they haven't been involved in conflicts, but they haven't had a large land war in the
Mm-hmm.
way that other countries have. And even a weakened Russia might present a challenge to them. So I think it's for us, we will never know, but at some point, China will feel confident enough to try something, and it will either be to the north to Manchuria or to, over to Taiwan or yet another place that we don't know of. And to do that, they will have to feel that their army has grown, that their navy has grown with equipment and with personnel. And also, they will have to be confident that the United States will not interfere. They do not want that to happen. So that can happen either with having United States in a civil war of some sort, or part of the reason that they've been investing in South and Central America is to block access to the Panama Canal, so that the United States can't easily send ships and resupplies to Taiwan through the Panama Canal. It's basically anything that's on the western side of the United States, for to be able to be sent over. Because if it's in the Atlantic and somehow the Chinese were able to send the ship into the Panama Canal and have it sink or block access, all of a sudden we're talking about a much different world. Also, the other thing that has influenced China's thinking is Operation Spiderweb in Ukraine. Is it possible for them to disable a lot of the U.S. Air Force bases with drones, just like Operation Spiderweb did in Russia? to prevent the United States again from responding to an attack of Taiwan or other crisis area on the eastern side of the globe.
Oh yeah, I didn't think of that yet, but
Very,
that's
very, very sad conversations I keep having here. So,
interesting. But interesting. This is well, okay. So I think to get a positive outcome of our talk here,
yes.
or was this already a positive outcome? I'm not sure if China if when China gets involved, it's not a positive outcome because it's
No.
one factor of war more, and we don't want
Yeah.
that. We want the
Yeah.
war to be stopped. Also, the war of in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in Ukraine, and we talk about Ukraine all the time, but
Yeah.
now we talk all the time about Trump, and
Yeah.
so I think it's time that the war in Ukraine will be stopped, and that Russia will stop it somehow. But why should they stop it? Just because they collapse, I guess. That would be the reason. Uh,
War will continue. Russia will continue war so long as there's a Russia. That's what Ukrainians know. That's what other countries know. And unfortunately, the rest of the world still believes that they will be able to have a Russia that backs down and will never fight again. And that's never going to happen so long as there's a Russia.
that's never going to happen. Yeah, that's also what I feel. And many people in Germany don't know that. My father he told me exactly that, and
Wow.
I didn't believe him because when I was young I was kind of enthusiastic, but my father was very disillusioned. My
Yeah.
father came from East Germany and he fled to West Germany, and I grew up as a West German, so socialized to be pro-American. But the East Germans, it's a
Well,
big chunk of people
there,
who are very critic against the United States and very also critic to the Russians, but um, it,
it was an authoritarian time, and that's the real difference: authoritarianism
that's
versus the
the point.
Western. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. That's it. We have to get back to democracy. Not to get back to democracy, but keep it alive, and that is the most important thing. And the United States, they are really on the brink now to be not a democratic country anymore. And so, what Ben Hodges said, save us from ourselves. I guess, it's time for a democratic alliance which is strong enough to protect democracy worldwide. So
Well, you mentioned at the beginning that, it was sad to see a country like the United States that has always been at the forefront of promoting democracy. However, within the United States, we are not the innovator in democracy as other countries have. You
mhm.
mentioned European democracies, Australia. These are countries that constantly change their constitution, change their laws, making sure that there's a greater emphasis on democracy and making sure that foreign forces or domestic forces that work against democracy aren't influencing elections and rulership. It's what allowed Australia to deal with gun violence. It's what allowed them to deal with so many domestic issues. Whereas in the United States, we still operate in a first past the post system, which means that in Congress, in our individual state elections, we have no representation for the opposition. It's majority rules, and that's it. In your particular district, it's not broken up by 50% for the majority party, 30% for the opposition, and then 10 or 20 for the smaller opposition parties. We don't have that in the United States like we have in other countries, and without constant innovation in your systems, the enemies, whether they're foreign or domestic, are always going to work towards working against democracy, plugging up those mechanisms and not enabling us to go forward, much like Australia was able to deal with gun violence. The United States is not. Europe is working towards different regulation of many mega corporations, transnational digital corporations. The United States is not. There are things that our system of government has prevented us from doing, and that's partly because we have blocked any introduction of constitutional amendments, changes to our law in a way that other countries have figured out to do much better than the United States, actually.
Yeah, but to change a rule, a system, you have to maybe break it. I think it sounds weird, but usually it happens like that because to change a system that is running, it is
Yeah.
very difficult to change it if there is no urgent need for it. But probably this could be the chance for the United States that now the system is under such a big threat that perhaps it's starting to break, and later on they will be able to reestablish it.
Well, not reestablish it, but change it for the better. When the Constitution was signed and debated, our founding fathers in this country did not think that it would be the eternal Constitution. They thought there would be other conventions every 5-10 years to re-examine democracy and have all the citizens gather together again through their representatives and debate what kind of constitution we need in the next decade. We've seen new constitutions in other countries. They're constantly rewritten, added to. Here in the United States, we have set up such a system that prevents changes, and we do not want to change that system because we're afraid of what will come after that. We were much like people are afraid of helping Ukraine because they're afraid what happens in Russia after Putin. They're sane people, good leaders in this country who have been afraid for decades about what would happen if we allowed changes to happen to our constitution, not in the way that currently exists, which means you have to have a majority of states ratify a change to the constitution, but have a national convention, have a constitutional convention, what happened at the beginning of our republic over 200 years ago, and have that be a regular event every 15, 20 years where Americans get to decide, well, maybe this part of the Constitution isn't something we need. Maybe we need a better system so more people can be involved.
So this sounds very German to me. Also, being afraid, being afraid of what comes next. This is maybe that's just human.
It's possible, but it's also, there are many forces that have prevented change from happening. The United States hasn't expanded our Congress since before World War II in terms of how many people a congressman can represent. So it's just grown and grown and grown and grown how many people a congressman represents, and it's still a finite number of members of Congress. So we are somewhat 7 or 10 times larger areas that our members of Congress represent than a deputy in the German parliament or other countries. It's something that distances our leaders from everyday life here in America. So there are many changes that are needed for our people to maybe return to the way it was at the very beginning in terms of how our democracy was looked at as constantly something to be evolved. But at this point, I fear that we're at this point where even the sane-minded people are afraid of letting the not so sane people amend the Constitution. But that's part of democracy. You need to be allowed to fail in order to allow to fix it as well. So
let's finish it like that, Andrij. I guess.
Great.
I guess we will not change the world now, but I'm sure I'm sure that it will come out. It will come out for the good in the end. But maybe we have to go through some valleys still.
Well, we're waiting on the tariffs to be ruled on by the Supreme Court, which everybody thinks will happen any moment. It should have happened before the new year. We don't know why they haven't issued a ruling, but if the Supreme Court rules that yes, the Constitution says that only Congress levies tariffs. I think this will be a major shift in terms of what the administration is able to do. It affects Greenland. It affects the spending that the administration is doing now. It affects what kind of budget deal will be made so we don't have shutdowns. There are many things that kind of ruling would affect us. So I think that's the next big thing for all of us. And some people are saying that the Supreme Court might rule on it today or tomorrow. So we're all waiting for the next news to come out.
Yeah, I cannot really follow all those news which are coming out. For example, about tariffs, the European Union has agreed on a very unfortunate rule of tariffs that the United States, they can get into Europe with zero tariffs, and the Europeans would pay 15% on everything. And that was really very good for Trump and for the Americans. Sounds great, and we have been bowing once more again for them. But now Trump ruined that also. So it's
he went back at it and said more tariffs.
You don't want Greenland? Don't want to give me Greenland? Okay, let's put the tariffs up.
No more Lego and no more Ozempic, and that's it.
You must prevent him somehow to do whatever he wants, because he will really ruin the whole thing. Just like a 3-year-old with a gun in his hand. So take away this gun from him. He will kill everybody.
Yes and no. Yes, I mean we don't want this to continue happening, but also there need to be consequences for democracy. Otherwise, voters won't learn that they can actually like their vote does matter. For many decades in this country, everybody said, "Well, it's just the same Democrats, Republicans. They don't really change anything." And now we have this person that's actually making changes in
Yeah.
the way of life around the world, and people should realize that when they go to vote next time, that their vote actually does matter. What they voted or just for those who decided not to vote last time, that affected millions of lives around the world.
Yeah. I mean, and it will also cause damage which cannot be repaired. Just
No.
remember this caricature I made with Uncle Sam chopping away his own hand. I don't want to show this once again. Cannot say anything. It's good what you said. Thank you very much, Andrij.
Thank you so much.
And thanks a lot for having the time to talk with me today on this channel. And really glad you have been, by the way, the very first interview partner I had in this channel, and see how it's growing already.
And maybe the first subscriber, I'm not sure, but I am subscribed and I do get to like all the videos. So I hope everybody else does that as well.
Yeah, please share it also on your social
Sure,
networks.
sure.
And before it has been also the music channel, because it was called We Play for Ukraine. It's about Europe and Ukraine. Ukraine is a European country, and Ukraine is maybe also the rescuer of democracy in Europe, and maybe also the very big part of rescuing the democracy worldwide, being against forces like the Russians, and now Donald Trump, crazy enough that he is president. Cannot believe it.
We'll see.
But
We'll see
yeah,
what happens.
yeah. Stay strong and stay resilient.
You,
And ми переможемо. Слава Україні!
Героям слава.